There are a lot of times where you need to join two pieces of metal together and you can't use a mechanical fastener like a nut or a bolt. Now, luckily there are a lot of ways to do this, and it typically involves melting one metal and sticking it onto another. So today we're going to talk a lot about the most common processes that you'll find at most automotive repair or fabrication shops. Now, the big difference between all these is the temperature at which the metal will melt. Now, soldering is a term that you mostly hear about in the automotive context of wiring. Basically, you're using a little bit of filler and gluing two pieces of copper wire together. Most solder melts at around 400 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to the melting point of copper, which is closer to 2000. With such a low melting point, all you need is an electric soldering iron to melt the solder and flow it into the copper joint. Brazing is a very similar process to soldering, but the main difference is the temperature at which the brazing rod melts. It's closer to 1500 degrees, whereas the solder is only 400. So instead of using an electric soldering iron, we need to use a gas torch. We're going to heat up the base metal, but not completely melt it. Then slowly introduce the brazing rod. Basically, we're going to melt the filler wire and it will stick to the base metal, kind of like a hot glue gun. Now, clearly, I'm not a brazing expert. In fact, I've only ever done it a couple times because with modern welding equipment, there really isn't that much need for it. But it's especially useful if you're joining two types of dissimilar metal together or you're working with cast iron. Now, the biggest difference between welding and brazing is when you're brazing, you're actually just melting one metal on top of another, kind of like applying glue. But when you're welding, you're actually fusing the two different surfaces of metal together, effectively making one solid piece. The oldest process is known as stick welding. It uses a shielded filler rod as an electrode, and electric current is used to heat up the base metal and melt in the filler, fusing the two pieces together. Once it's cooled off, chip away the slag caused by the shielding, exposing the weld. The next and probably most widely used process is MIG welding. A spool of filler wire is stored inside the machine, and it's fed out through a hose to the end of the torch. When you pull the trigger, filler wire is fed out along with the shielding gas to protect the molten puddle. My personal favorite is TIG welding. Here, a sharpened tungsten acts as the electrode and it's shielded with argon. Once an arc is struck, filler material is fed in by hand. If you include soldering, that's 5 different methods for joining metals together. Now, if you want to learn more about any of these processes, you could take a class at your local welding school, or there's always a lot of resources on the web.